Hi, and welcome to our video on photosynthesis. Before we get anywhere else, let's just pause and acknowledge that photosynthesis is super important. It is the only reason that you are here right now, because you are being able to get the molecules and substances that you need in order to remain alive, and that is all intimately connected to photosynthesis. In this video, we're going to look at how photosynthesis takes the kinetic energy of light and converts it into chemical energy in a very broad sense. We're going to focus on the matter and energy transformations that occur during the major stages of photosynthesis, and we're going to talk about the role of photosynthesis in living systems. This is the summary equation for photosynthesis. So what I've done here is I've color-coded each of the atoms so you can see where they start and where they wind up. So we've got water, and water is actually going to be split apart in this process. It is going to provide protons that will wind up in things like glucose over on the other side, but it's also going to produce the oxygen that is released as a waste product of photosynthesis. And of course, we also need a carbon source, and that carbon is coming in from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We break photosynthesis into two major steps. We have our light-dependent reactions, which you will not be surprised to learn require light in order to be powered. And then we have a second part called carbon fixation. When we think about photosynthesis in eukaryotes, we need to have a bit of an understanding of the structure of chloroplasts, which are the organelles in which photosynthesis occurs. This is a cutaway view of a chloroplast, and we can see a couple of different regions that we should focus on. This inside part that is just a liquid inside of the internal membrane of the chloroplast is called the stroma. And then we've also circled one of these stacks of membranes and blown it up in this zoom out over here. These are called thylakoids. And so actually I've introduced them in reverse order from where the processes occur. The thylakoids are where the light-dependent reactions occur. And then the stroma is going to be where carbon fixation occurs. We should also pause here and point out that this is true in eukaryotes. It's certainly not the case in prokaryotes. And prokaryotes are actually where photosynthesis first developed. Prokaryotic organisms that carry out photosynthesis just do it in their cytoplasm. And actually, we have a lot of evidence that suggests that chloroplasts in eukaryotes are directly descended from photosynthetic prokaryotes, specifically the type known as cyanobacteria. So over billions of years since that incorporation of a cyanobacterium into a modern-day plant-like eukaryote has occurred, the chloroplast has undergone additional evolution, and now it has the structure that you see here. In each of these major steps in photosynthesis, we're going to focus on what is occurring, and we're going to pay attention to the inputs and the outputs. This is a very broad description of what's going to happen here, but it's the level of resolution I need you to know it at for this course. If you're interested in knowing more, I am happy to provide you with more resources, and you can get more in-depth. Just be warned that as we go more in depth, things get more complicated. If we think about what happens in the light-dependent reactions, we obviously need light to drive that. If we think about a molecule of water, what's going to happen in the light-dependent reactions is that light is going to break that molecule of water apart. It's going to cause that water to become oxygen gas and protons, 2 H pluses. And in that process, it is also going to produce some high-energy electrons. Those electrons, in turn, are going to be used by the cell in order to produce two molecules that are going to be important for the second step. We're going to produce ATP, which we've talked about before, and we're also going to produce what's called an electron shuttle, which is a molecule that's going to bring electrons from the water that it was taken from over into the next step. In particular, the electron shuttle found in photosynthesis is called NADPH, which is a good thing for you to have in your brain. This ATP and these electron shuttles are going to go into the second part, and everything else is going to stay here except, of course, for the oxygen, which is going to leave as a waste product. So if we're thinking about inputs and outputs, the only input that we put into photosynthesis external to the plant body is H2O, and I guess we could call light an input even though it is not made out of matter. And our outputs for that are going to be oxygen gas, which is a waste product. We're going to get ATP, and we're going to get NADPH. We don't need to worry about the numbers here or anything like that, but you need to understand that these are the things that we get out. As long as you can give a producer light and water, you can have the light-dependent reactions occurring. The second step in photosynthesis, carbon fixation, which is occurring at the stroma of the chloroplast, is going to take carbon dioxide and it is going to incorporate that carbon dioxide into biological carbon. It's going to incorporate it specifically into sugar molecules. This requires an input of energy. So that input of energy is going to come from the ATP that we produce during the light-dependent reactions. We're also going to need some electrons to do this, and we have those electrons from our NADPH molecules that we produced before, and of course we're going to need CO2 as well. The output is going to be a sugar, and of course the ATP is going to be converted back to ADP, and the NADPH goes back to being the form it needs to be in to receive electrons, which is called NADP+. We could get a lot more detailed than this if we really wanted to, but I don't think it's really useful for us and for this video for us to get too lost in the weeds for this course. One thing I will point out, though, is that this sugar that we're making, for example, glucose, is going to be foundational for plants when producing all of those biological macromolecules that we've talked about in previous video. Carbohydrates, which are sugars, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins are all going to be made by plants thanks to the action of photosynthesis, which is providing producers with the raw materials that they need to make those molecules. And photosynthesis is also producing all of the oxygen that we breathe, and that we'll use to get energy out of these molecules when we consume them in the process known as respiration. So much more than consumers, producers are what make the diversity of life on our planet possible. And if you take a breath right now, and I highly encourage you to do that, all of the oxygen that you're using is coming to you courtesy of the various producers, both in our forests and in our oceans. As we wrap up this video, we want to make sure that you can check your learning and that you can do the following. You want to make sure that you can explain what happens during photosynthesis, including what happens in both major steps, the light-dependent reactions and carbon fixation. You want to know where both major steps occur in eukaryotic cells, and you want to know the inputs and the outputs of all major steps and the point or the role that they play. You also want to make sure that you can describe how each substance in the summary equation for photosynthesis is used or produced in the process. If you can do those things, you're doing great. If not, that's okay too. Take a moment, pause the video, and write down any questions that you have so that you can get the answers that you need. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.